All right, let's jump into another deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at the J-35A stealth fighter. It's a Chinese jet, and, we've got this in-depth analysis on it, and it really seems to be shaking things up in the world of military aviation.
Yeah, it's causing quite a stir, especially in the Indo-Pacific region. A lot of people are asking if it's like legitimate contender to the F-35, or are we just buying into the hype?
That's the big question, right? Like, can it actually stack up against the American F-35?
Yeah.
We're going to unpack all that, the tech, the strategy behind it all. But before we get into all of that, maybe we should take a step back. For anyone who's not up on all the lingo, when we say fifth-generation fighter, what exactly are we talking about?
Right. Not everyone eats, sleeps, and breathes military aviation. So basically, fifth-generation fighters are a huge leap forward in terms of, well, everything. You've got stealth tech, so it's harder to detect on radar. You've got way more advanced sensors, giving pilots incredible awareness of the battle space. And they can network with other systems in a way that previous generations just couldn't. They're like information hubs now, not just combat aircraft.
So it's not your grandfather's dogfighting anymore? These are like ghosts in the sky, seeing everything before the enemy does, coordinating attacks with crazy accuracy.
You got it. And the J-35A is trying to do all that. It's based on the FC-31 Gerfalcon, developed by the Shenyang Aircraft Corporation. And here's a fun fact. This thing is designed for both land and carrier operations.
Wait, hold on. Carrier ops? You mean they can launch from aircraft carriers with that whole CATOPAR system?
Yeah.
For our listeners who aren't familiar, that's where the planes use a catapult to get airborne, like a giant slingshot on the deck of a ship. It's not easy to pull off.
Exactly. And that right there tells you how serious China is about projecting power beyond their own backyard. Carrier-based aircraft give them the ability to operate far from home.
And to do that effectively, you need stealth. This analysis really digs into the J-35A's stealth features. Angled surfaces, special radar absorbent materials, the whole 9 yards. It's like trying to make the plane disappear from enemy radar.
Yep, that's the goal. Minimizing that radar signature so you can slip past defenses and get that payload where it needs to go.
Speaking of payload, this is where things get interesting. The J-35A has some seriously high-tech gear on board, like an active electronically scanned array radar. I know that sounds like a mouthful, but what exactly does that mean in terms of, blowing stuff up?
Right. Think of it this way. You know those old flashlights with a single beam? Now imagine a super high-tech LED array that can shine light in multiple directions at the same time. That's AESA. It scans the airspace way faster, it's more accurate, and much, much harder to jam.
So basically, the J-35A can see further, track targets better, and it's less likely to be blinded by enemy countermeasures.
Precisely. And on top of that, it has an electro-optical targeting system, or EOTs, and a distributed aperture system, DAS. Similar to what they have on the F-35, these systems give the pilot a crazy level of situational awareness, basically an extra set of eyes, letting them detect and engage targets at long range.
Okay, I see why the F-35 comparisons are coming up. But is this a straight-up copycat, or is China doing something different with the J-35A?
Well, it's not just a carbon copy. China is making some specific choices that tell us a lot about how they intend to use this jet. Take the twin-engine design, for example.
Yeah, the analysis highlights that. Twin engines obviously mean more power, so what does that tell us about their thinking?
A few things. First, it gives you a higher thrust-to-weight ratio, meaning faster acceleration and better agility in the air. And second, it opens up the possibility of supercruise that's flying at supersonic speeds without needing to use afterburners, which is a huge deal for fuel efficiency and tactical flexibility.
So we're talking about a jet that's designed to be fast, maneuverable, and able to sustain supersonic flight for longer periods. Sounds like they're really emphasizing air superiority.
You're picking up on it. The twin-engine design definitely suggests they're thinking about how to win in a potential dogfight scenario, but there are always trade-offs, and in this case, it could be stealth.
So more power might mean a bigger radar signature, which is not great for staying hidden.
It's a classic design dilemma. You can't always have it all. The J-35A seems to be leaning more towards maneuverability and power, whereas the F-35, with its single engine, is more focused on sensor fusion, electronic warfare, and network connectivity.
Different strengths, different philosophies. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, enough teasing. Let's talk firepower. What kind of weapons can this thing actually carry?
Well, they're aiming for versatility here. It can carry air-to-air missiles to take down other planes, air-to-ground missiles for precision strikes, even precision-guided bombs. And it's got an internal weapons bay to maintain that stealthy profile when it needs to. But it can also carry extra weapons on external hardpoints if stealth isn't the top priority.
So it could be a sneaky hunter or a heavily armed bomber, depending on the mission. Pretty versatile. But what really stood out to me, the analysis, was the electronic warfare suite.
Ah, yes, the EW capabilities. Can't forget about those. This is where things get really interesting in modern warfare. The J-35A is equipped to jam enemy radar, disrupt communications, and even deploy countermeasures like chaff and flares to throw off incoming missiles. It's all about surviving and disrupting in a very electronically contested environment.
Basically giving the jet a digital shield and a high-tech sword.
You got it. And here's the kicker. China might be able to produce these things at a rate that could actually outpace U.S. production.
Hold on, seriously. If they can build these things faster and potentially flood the skies with them, wouldn't that totally shift the balance of power?
Well, that's the question everyone's asking, right? The potential for a large number of J-35As is a big deal, and everyone's watching closely to see how it plays out. This is definitely something that could have major implications for the global balance of power.
Okay, that's a little unsettling. Maybe we should take a breather for a second, recap what we know so far.
All right, so the J-35A is a very capable twin-engine, fifth-generation fighter, and it's clear that China designed it with air superiority in mind. It's got the advanced stealth features, the sophisticated sensors, the flexible weapons payload, all of it. This thing could be a game changer in any aerial engagement.
And with China's manufacturing power behind it, we could be looking at a real force to be reckoned with. But how does it all actually fit into the bigger picture? What does it mean for things like regional stability and global power dynamics? I guess that's where we're headed next.
Yeah, that's where things get really interesting. We'll pick up that conversation in the next part of our deep dive. Don't go anywhere, because this is where the real strategic analysis kicks in.
This is going to be good.
The J-35A, it's not just about China adding another fighter to their fleet. It's a pretty clear signal that they want to change the whole game when it comes to military aviation.
Yeah, like they're saying, hey, we're here, we can hang with the big boys, and we're not going to play by the old rules anymore.
Exactly. This is a whole different way of thinking for them, moving away from just defending their own territory and towards a more aggressive strategy of projecting their power.
So they're not just thinking about protecting their own airspace. They want to be able to operate anywhere in the world, maybe even challenge the U.S. Navy in the Pacific.
You got it. And that's where the carrier-based J-35A comes in. It gives China the ability to flex its muscles far from home, and that has some serious consequences for everyone in the region and even for the global balance of power.
Let's talk about those consequences. How do you think this new jet is going to impact countries in the Indo-Pacific, especially U.S. allies like Japan, South Korea, and Australia?
Put yourself in their shoes for a minute. You've been relying on the U.S. for protection for decades, and suddenly there's a new player on the scene with advanced capabilities who's not afraid to shake things up. It's got to be a little nerve-wracking.
Like that butterfly effect thing, right?
Yeah.
One little change can cause huge waves somewhere else. This feels kind of like one of those moments.
It definitely does. The J-35A throws a lot of uncertainty into the mix. Countries in the region might start to wonder if the U.S. is really committed to protecting them. I mean, if China can actually challenge the U.S. Air Force, does that mean America can't really back up its allies? It's a question they can't just ignore.
So it's not just a military thing, it's a psychological thing too. It could erode trust and maybe even kick off a regional arms race as everyone tries to beef up their defenses.
Exactly. We could see more military spending, modernization programs, maybe even new alliances forming as countries scramble to adjust to this new reality. It's like that security dilemma thing. One country tries to make itself safer and it ends up making everyone else feel less safe, and then things can spiral out of control.
Which leads to the big question, how does the U.S. respond to all of this? Do they try to build more F-35s to keep up with China, or is there another strategy?
Tough question, and there's no easy answer. The U.S. has a few options, but they all have downsides. They could try to build a ton of F-35s to keep a numbers advantage, but that's going to cost a fortune and take forever.
But we talked earlier about how the J-35A and the F-35 have different strengths, different philosophies. Maybe it's not just about how many planes you have, it's about how you use the technology.
I think you're right. Instead of getting into a numbers game, the U.S. might be better off focusing on the areas where they still have a clear advantage. Sensor fusion, electronic warfare, network connectivity. They could double down on those strengths, develop even more advanced systems, and try to maintain a qualitative edge over China.
So it becomes this high-stakes tech race, pushing the boundaries of what's possible in air combat.
Exactly. It's like a high-tech chess match with each side trying to outmaneuver the other.
But it's not just a two-player game, is it? You've got Russia with their Su-57, and European countries are working together on their own next-generation fighters. The days of one superpower ruling the skies are over, huh?
It looks that way. We're heading towards a multipolar world, and that comes with both opportunities and challenges. On the one hand, it could mean power is more spread out, making it harder for any one country to dominate everyone else. Maybe that could actually make large-scale conflicts less likely.
Like a global system of checks and balances.
Right. But a multipolar world can also be way more unpredictable and volatile. With multiple power centers all competing for influence, there's a greater chance of miscalculations, misunderstandings, and things escalating out of control. Regional conflicts could easily blow up if the major powers get involved on opposite sides.
So it's a double-edged sword. The J-35A and all these other advanced fighters are pushing us toward this new world order, but we don't know if it's going to make us safer or put us all at greater risk.
It's a complex situation, and we need to step up our game when it comes to diplomacy and strategic thinking. We're all in uncharted territory here, trying to figure out what it all means.
That's what makes this so fascinating and honestly a little scary. We're watching a major turning point in military history, and the J-35A is right at the center of it.
It's not just a fighter jet. It's a symbol of how power is shifting globally. This deep dive isn't just about understanding a new plane. It's about trying to wrap our heads around the future of global power, how countries interact with each other, and the possibility of both conflict and cooperation in this century.
Okay, so we've talked about what the J-35A can do, the implications for the region, this whole shift towards a multipolar world. But let's bring it back down to earth for our listeners. What does this mean for the average person? How could this impact us, even if we're thousands of miles away from the Indo-Pacific?
That's a great question, and it's easy to feel like all of this is happening somewhere else and doesn't really affect us. But honestly, the J-35A is a wake-up call. It shows us how interconnected the world really is.
So we can't just bury our heads in the sand and pretend it's not our problem. We have to pay attention to what's happening in the world, especially when it comes to military tech and all the geopolitical tensions.
Absolutely. But being aware is only the first step. We need to have real conversations about this stuff and think critically. We need to be asking the tough questions, challenging assumptions, considering different viewpoints. We can't just passively read headlines and listen to sound bites. We have to actively engage with these issues if we want to understand them and find solutions.
That's how we learn, right? When we go beyond just the facts and start asking, so what? Why does this matter? What are the possible outcomes, both good and bad?
Exactly. And here's the thing. We're not powerless. We all have a voice, and we can use it to support policies that promote peace and stability. We can get behind organizations that are trying to prevent conflict, build bridges between countries, and help people understand each other better.
It's like that ripple effect again. But this time, it's a good thing. Even small actions can create change that spreads out and affects our communities, our country, even the whole world.
And don't underestimate the power of human connection. Reach out to people from different cultures, different backgrounds, different points of view. Learn from each other, share your stories, build relationships. The more we connect as human beings, the harder it is to see each other as enemies.
Maybe that's the key, even though it sounds kind of corny. If we can remember that we're all part of the same human family, sharing this planet, maybe that can be the foundation for a more peaceful future. Maybe that's the antidote to all the fear and division that leads to conflict.
I completely agree. It's a good reminder that even with all the complex challenges we're facing, even with the threat of advanced military technology hanging over us, human connection, compassion, and understanding can make a real difference.
That's a good note to end on, especially after all the tough stuff we've been talking about. So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, the message is clear. Don't just sit on the sidelines. Get informed, get involved, speak up for peace and understanding.
Couldn't have said it better myself. We're not just passengers on this ride. The choices we make today will determine what the future looks like. And every single one of us can do something to build a world where peace, cooperation, and human flourishing win out.
Okay, so we've explored the challenges and what might happen in this shifting landscape. But let's get a little more practical. What are some actual ways forward? How do we navigate this multipolar world and avoid all the potential problems you've talked about?
That's a great question, and it deserves a deep dive of its own. But I think the first step is to be really honest about the risks and opportunities. We need to understand what motivates the major players, where the flashpoints are, and come up with strategies for managing competition while also looking for ways to cooperate.
So it's about balancing deterrence with diplomacy, strength with collaboration. Sounds like a tough balancing act.
It definitely is. We need leaders who can think strategically, communicate clearly, and build consensus. We need to move beyond simplistic answers and ideological stances.
This is where it gets really interesting and maybe a little scary. How do we find those kinds of leaders in a world that feels so polarized and divided? How do we bridge the gaps and find common ground on issues as complex as global security and military technology?
That's the million-dollar question. I don't have all the answers, but I think it starts with recognizing our shared humanity, seeing how interconnected we all are, and finding ways to talk to each other, even when we disagree.
So it's about building empathy, fostering understanding, seeking common ground. That sounds really challenging, but also essential if we want to make it in this new world order.
It is challenging, but I think we can do it. We need a shift in our thinking. We have to be willing to step outside our comfort zones and commit to finding solutions that work for everyone, not just a select few.
Well said. As we move into the final part of our deep dive, let's shift our focus to the individual. We've talked about global implications, strategic challenges, the need for collective action. But what can each of us as individuals do to make the future more peaceful and secure? What are some concrete steps we can take no matter where we are or what our background is? And that's been on my mind this whole time. Like, we've talked about all this big picture stuff, but what can regular people actually do about it? It feels kind of overwhelming.
It's easy to feel powerless when you're looking at these global forces, right? Like, we're just along for the ride. But honestly, I think that's giving up before you even start. We all have a part to play.
Okay, I like that. No giving up. But where do we even begin? What can people actually do? Especially if they're not, politicians or generals.
First things first, learn about this stuff. Don't just skim the headlines. Really dig into the issues, the different sides of the story, what could happen depending on what choices are made. Knowledge is power, right? And it's how we make smart decisions.
So be a critical thinker. Don't just believe everything you read. And look for different perspectives, not just the ones you already agree with.
Exactly. And once you've learned something, talk about it. Have conversations with your friends, your family, your coworkers. Share what you're learning, even if it just gets them thinking about it a little bit. The more people who are informed and engaged, the better off we'll all be.
It's like that saying, one spark can start a fire, right? Maybe every conversation is a little spark that helps people understand and maybe even motivates them to do something.
I like that. And your voice matters more than you think. Reach out to your elected officials. Let them know what you think, what you're worried about, what you hope for. Tell them you want policies that prioritize diplomacy, conflict resolution, working together with other countries.
So take what you've learned and make it real. Make your voice heard. But what about in our own lives, our own communities? Is there anything we can do closer to home to make things more peaceful?
Of course, there are so many amazing organizations out there that are on the front lines of preventing and resolving conflicts. NGOs, humanitarian groups, they're doing incredible work to build bridges, promote understanding, and tackle the root causes of these problems. Volunteer with them, donate, help them spread their message.
It's like that ripple effect, but in a positive way.
Yeah.
The things we do, even if they seem small, they can make a difference. And that difference can spread out and have an impact on our communities, our country, maybe even the whole world.
That's the idea. And never underestimate the power of human connection. Talk to people from different cultures, different backgrounds, different walks of life. Learn from each other. Share your stories. Build relationships based on empathy and understanding. The more we do that, the harder it is to see each other as the enemy.
It might sound corny, but maybe that's what it comes down to. Remembering that we're all in this together, we're all part of the same human family. Maybe that's how we build a more peaceful and collaborative future. Maybe that's how we overcome the fear and division that leads to conflict.
I couldn't agree more. It's a good reminder that even with all the complicated stuff happening in the world, even with all the scary military technology out there, human connection, compassion, and understanding can actually make a difference.
That's a hopeful way to look at things, especially after all the heavy stuff we've talked about. So to wrap up this deep dive, I think the takeaway is, don't just watch from the sidelines. Be informed, be engaged, and use your voice to promote peace and understanding.
Well said. The future is not set in stone. It's shaped by the decisions we make today. We all have a responsibility to try to build a better world, a world where peace and cooperation win out, a world where everyone can thrive.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep the conversation going, keep learning, and keep working towards a brighter future. We'll see you next time.